Post-graduation coffee? It just hits different. And I am finally heading back up to Sisterdale after not having been up there for quite a few months, if we're being honest. Grad school life. But Michael's been working on some really cool projects that I've seen in pictures, some epoxy wood trays, some other tables, and we're going to do a photo shoot there, so some product photography, and just basically take you along on how that's done, and just hanging out outside of San Antonio and getting out of the city. So, cheers.
Oh, it's nice to see you. Oh, hi, puppy. Oh, my.
But yeah, on a larger version, I guess you could use it for like a. So it's like being done. It's pretty good.
Since we did an outdoor shoot, the goal was to focus on the tables and include as much natural foliage and scenery as possible without taking away from the shoot itself. But since we were shooting at midday, we had to work around harsh sunlight and less than ideal shadow positioning. Also, since it was just the two of us, I opted to use a fill flash on camera and have Michael operate the softbox flash, since setting up a static 5-in-1 reflector would have been really more trouble than it's worth. In hindsight, next time I'll have Michael prepare a staging area in his house that will allow us to showcase the pieces in their more natural indoor habitat, which will also help me control lighting more effectively. With an iPad Pro, all you need is an SD card reader and you're ready to import your photo files. I use an Anchor SD card reader or a Hyperdrive USB-C dongle for all of my USB, SD, and dongle needs. And thus far, they've both been great and very convenient to use on the go. If you're interested in getting one for your iPad, I'll go ahead and put links for both of them in the description below. The process of importing full-sized images is reasonably quick, and using Adobe Lightroom, you can create automatically synced folders with Adobe Lightroom Classic, which means you don't have to double import later down the line, helping you create a photography catalog on the go. And for imports, I typically import the vast majority of my pictures and exclude the obviously early test shots or out of focus photos, so I can move on to sorting, rejecting, and rating my pictures after importing. Once I've imported, I run a quick pass-through to reject or accept imported pictures, then look through all the accepted images and rate them 1 to 5 stars. Filter out all the photos that are 4 stars and above for editing, which easily trims something like 100 shots down to 12 that are worthwhile to edit. I also forgot to mention, for photo shoots like this, I shoot in a RAW format and flat picture profile, so I can tinker with them as much as possible in post, instead of shooting JPEGs that are ready straight out of camera. Editing photos on an iPad has been a game changer. Not only do you feel more connected to the editing process, but you can do it anywhere and not feel confined to sitting at your desk for hours on end. Since I wanted to help Michael hone his photo editing skills this go around, I walked Michael through my editing process and we went through it together so he could practice and get a rhythm down for editing and learn a few features that I hadn't showed him previously, like picture gradients and healing or cloning touch-ups. And because we were actually shooting outdoors and in front of, green grass and trees, I did actually have to be careful when editing the green table in particular. And so I had to be mindful of green saturation, and as a result, I did selective edits for the table to make sure the background stayed more neutral, but the table actually popped. And I usually start my editing process by cropping or framing to either a specific aspect ratio or do a custom reframe and just include what is relevant to the story I'm telling, or in this case, the product I'm showcasing. From there, I adjust overall exposure and contrast and fine-tune it using shadows, blacks, highlights, and white sliders. From there, going to saturation, and for table edits in particular, I like to do color specific saturation because, the epoxy may be a specific color and wood may be a specific color that I can really bring out by, doing sliders on, for example, blues and greens for these tables, and then also reds and oranges for the wood. For this tray edit, there was a notable blemish by the handle that I wanted to hide. I first tried using the heel tool to give a slightly more blended solution to hide this spot, but ended up not liking how it turned out. I ultimately opted to use the clone tool, which duplicates an exact replica of another area of the image, and just made sure to match the grain pattern near the handle. Both spot removal tools are great to use for adjusting blemishes and duplicating or removing objects, but their exact use is on a case-by-case basis depending on your picture and what exactly you're trying to spot remove. Briefly breaking away from tables, I want to show you one of the best examples I have for utilizing a number of different tools like gradients, selective edits, spot removal, and really thinking ahead for the shot with editing in mind. And so here is an edited image of a sunset in Palm Springs. And it's actually a particularly difficult lighting scenario because the sun is about to set behind these mountains. And I don't have the sun that's normally beaming overhead illuminating my foreground. So you see in this unedited image that my foreground is really underexposed. And I actually did that on purpose because in the iPad version of Lightroom, it's a lot harder to exposure stack than it is in the desktop version. And so in an exposure stacked scenario, I would expose for the sky, expose for the foreground, and then combine those images in post. Whereas here in the iPad, what I did is I took my shot underexposing the image and focusing on exposing for the sky. And the reason being is that if you overexpose an image and you try to bring down your highlights, none of that detail is going to be retained. And that's because cameras are not able to retain highlight detail like they are shadow detail. So underexposing this image and exposing for the sky, I can bring out my highlights and really bring out my sky, and I still retain all of that information in the shadows and the blacks. And you see in this edited image with the gradients and all of those edits applied, that my shadow and black detail was still there. I just had to edit the image and really think about, before taking the picture, how I was going to edit. And so when you do images of really difficult lighting scenarios, you really need to think about the edit and think about how you're going to change it, because something like this image would not be possible if I had exposed for the foreground instead of the sky. Opening up Lightroom and going to selective edits, we can see here I have a number of different selective edits that utilize both the brush tool and the gradient tool. And here you can see denoted by the red color is that this gradient is selected to change the exposure of the image, and it's done at an angle because I have the sky as well. So if I added a gradient here and then I drop the exposure down, you'd see that the image would go dark again. And obviously I don't want to do that, but because I increase the exposure here in this part of the image, I can actually improve the exposure of my shadow detail. I also have here in the sky, I utilize the brush tool, and that's because my skyline isn't necessarily straight across the board, and it was a little easier to just draw it to bring up saturation for the sky. Going to the healing tool, you can see on my healing tool here that I was able to heal this area of the image because it was a little, let's just say it was a little blemishy, and I wanted to fix this area for the image. And so all of these, putting it all together, is the ability for you to really take an image that realistically looks really underwhelming here, but because of the edit that you're doing, because of all the forethought you do before taking the image, you can recover a lot of detail and really make an image that pops and stands out, even though it initially didn't look that great. Lastly, I naturally couldn't help myself when I saw this really cool epoxy bench Michael made, so cue the sequence. Hopefully by now you've realized how intuitive and easy it is to use Adobe Lightroom on the iPad. Not only that, but editing with the Apple Pencil feels a lot more connected, so you're really a lot more connected to the flow of the editing process. And to top it off, you're not confined to a single location like you would be with a desktop edit. So you can edit not only at your desk, but at a coffee shop, or you can do a meetup with friends and just do all of your edits together. And if you have clients that want to see your photos and want to see a quick edit, you can add a LUT to those images and show them a quick preview with doing really minor edits all together. So ideally, you can see the power of utilizing the iPad for your editing flow. And if you wanted to, you could also put this in conjunction with doing more complicated edits on the computer, or just doing them together and then using them interchangeably. So that's going to be all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't done so, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one. A bientôt.